Welcome to Caregiver Chats. Today, I'm talking about using music as a tool in caregiving. So stay tuned and we'll get into it. Hi, Dr. Lakelyn here. I'm a gerontologist and caregiving advocate for Home Instead, an honor company. Today on Caregiver Chats, we're going to explore the power of music in caregiving. I love listening to music, and I hear from so many caregivers that music is a tool they use in their caregiving role. There are endless stories that I've heard over the years about the powerful effects music can have. A family caregiver named Melissa recently wrote to me to share her story. She says, "One thing I would like to share that has made an instantaneous difference for my 88-year-old mother's daily life is playing her favorite song, a folklore song that brings music to her ears. It's one that she enjoyed listening to when we were growing up and when she was younger. It brings a smile to her face and takes her back to a place of happiness and joy unspeakable. It also makes me feel like I have my mom back in the moment. And it makes her feel better about herself, no longer feeling lonely or sad." What a neat story, Melissa. Thank you for sharing. You can also share your experiences with me as well by emailing me at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. That's caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. It's incredible stories like Melissa's that made me want to dive deeper into the topic and connect with an expert on the subject. I'm excited to be joined today by board-certified music therapist Tara Jenkins. Welcome, Tara. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Would you mind telling us, our listeners, a little bit about you? I would love for them to get to learn more about you and the work that you do.
Sure. So I am a board certified music therapist and certified dementia practitioner, and I've been working in the dementia care community since 2007. And throughout my career, I've had many roles and responsibilities, which kind of make me uniquely qualified for the work I do today. I started out as an activity and volunteer coordinator in assisted living and memory care. I've pioneered a multi-sensory music therapy program at a long-term care community, and that was focused on working with groups, individuals, and those in end-of-life care. And then in 2014, I established a private practice in Washington, D.C., and that was working with older adults and caregivers in the area. And then in 2016, I relocated to Austin, and I furthered my experience as a senior staff music therapist at a local company. And about 2 years ago, I went back into private practice to really focus on support for caregivers. So I still do clinical sessions, but I have such a passion for education and support when it comes to students, professionals, and caregivers. And I've recently relocated once more. So I am brand new to Wilmington, North Carolina, and I plan to continue to serve the dementia community both here in Wilmington as well as virtually. That's a little bit about me.
Wow. I love hearing everyone's career paths and journeys. And it's so neat when you have a career path that has given you exposure to so many different settings and types of groups and individuals to work with, and then gives you just this wealth of knowledge and experience that has brought you to today and to our conversation. So I'm just super grateful again that you're here, and thanks for sharing about you. I'm also curious to know, what does it mean to be a board certified music therapist? Because I've heard the
Yes.
term music therapy talked about in various contexts. So would love for you to talk just a little bit more on what that is.
Sure. So, music therapy, it's a clinical and evidence-based practice. We use music to accomplish individualized goals and objectives, and our work supports clients' social, emotional, cognitive, physical, communication, musical, and spiritual needs. So, essentially, we're using different aspects of music to achieve individualized goals both in and outside of sessions. And we do that by assessing each client's strengths and needs. And then we tailor treatments depending on their needs and interests. And sometimes that's creating music, sometimes that's singing, moving, or listening to music. And clients don't need formal music training to benefit from music therapy. So I always like to stress that because some people feel like they have to be a musician, and that's not the case. But to become a music therapist, we undergo extensive training. So we have about 4 years of coursework that's followed by a 6-month internship, and that totals around 1,200 hours of clinical training. And it's a lot. It's a lot that I think people, they don't always realize it, which I understand, if you've never kind of spoken with a music therapist. But after that training, we take the national board exam, and that is to obtain the credential MTBC, which is Music Therapist Board Certified. And our degrees require knowledge in psychology, music, and medicine. So it's a pretty well-rounded degree.
That's really neat. I think that it's helpful to understand kind of the terminology when we talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
I know that many caregivers that I have spoken with over the years have found music to be so powerful, but I don't know if many have stopped to consider working with a music therapist. So again, so excited to talk more about this topic with you today, and would love to just really understand, why is music so powerful when it comes to caregiving, dementia, as we get older? What is it about music?
Yeah. So, what I love and what is so great about music is it activates many areas of our brain, including those associated with with memory and emotion. And so we can all listen to the same song, and we're all going to have different reactions and emotions based on our past experiences. So our neurons are continuing to fire until a connection is made. And so that's one of the many reasons music is so powerful for those living with dementia, is because our neurons are continuing to fire with all the different sensory input that music can provide. It's a multi-sensory experience, really activating almost all of our senses. So it's a really great way to make that connection with folks living with dementia. And so if you think of your favorite song, or a song you might have danced to at prom or at your wedding, or a song that your parents sung to you, or the first concert you attended, all of those examples, they connect us emotionally to a time and a place. And when we hear those songs or those melodies, it can bring us right back to that moment. And music accompanies life both personally and culturally. So if you think about music throughout our lives, we use it to learn our ABCs. When we sing happy birthday, songs that family and friends enjoyed is kind of surrounding us. If you think of the soundtrack of your life, it's going to look very different for each one of us. And musical processing is generalized throughout the brain rather than localized. So a lot of times, I'll hear from care staff or caregivers, Mrs. Jones can no longer talk, but she can sing. And so that's one of the reasons, is because, music isn't just in one specific area of the brain. So that's why that's able to happen. And all of that can account for why people living with dementia can retain musical information longer, and then also recall musical memories more clearly than non-musical memories.
Wow. Yeah, I think that is so fascinating, how music just is, I don't want to say untouched by dementia, but it still
Yeah.
can be, you know, those memories can be stored in the brain despite how dementia is impacting the brain. And I think that can be just so comforting to families when they are able to see their loved one connect to music, even though, as you mentioned, they might not be able to speak anymore. Or they might not remember their children's name or their spouse's name, but they can remember music, and that can be such a gift for a lot of families.
Yeah. Well, and it can also, when you were saying, not recalling family member's name, I was in a group, I think we were doing songs about water. I can't remember the song now, but it was summertime and things like that. And I had a resident who grew up by the beach. And so she remembered a very specific activity with a loved one, and she was frustrated because she couldn't remember their name. And I supported her, and we shared the experience. And several songs later, she just came out with the name. Wow. So, I'm not saying that that's always going to happen, but that is an example of how, music can really bridge that gap in so many ways, when it comes to providing connection and also connecting back to that individual's identity, their memories, and the people that they care about.
Wow, that's just so fascinating to me. Again, I just love music. It can be such a powerful tool. And I know, our listening base is made up of family caregivers. So how
Hmm.
can and how should caregivers use music as a tool? I know, we should use it probably in some situations, and maybe there's even situations where we should not use it. So can you speak a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Caregivers, when you use music with a loved one living with dementia in various situations, it can really enhance quality of life and well being. So I'm going to kind of start there,
Yeah.
where, what the benefits are. And then we can kind of go into when you might want to avoid it or just kind of, the things to look out for, so to
Yeah.
speak. But one of the improvements is mood enhancement. So, playing familiar and preferred music can uplift someone's mood. It can reduce agitation or frustration or anxiety, stress reduction. So, using calming music to help someone relax during times of stress or frustration. And I'm going to mention calming music or soothing music a couple times here. That a lot of times when folks talk about that, they're talking about music that is instrumental, that kind of has a slower beats per minute.
Hmm.
But I also say too, music that's relaxing for your loved one. So if they love Metallica and that relaxes them, you can play that, like
Yeah.
that might not be relaxing for me, but that might be relaxing for them. And I always love giving the example, not to get too sidetracked, but I played French horn in college and played a lot of classical music. And so a lot of times we think classical music is calm and soothing. And for some individuals it is. But if you played certain pieces for me, certain, movements or of different classical music, it would do the opposite for me because it would bring me back to a place of anxiety when I
Mm.
played in college. So it's just, I always like to share that with caregivers, the definition of calming or soothing music is kind of a broad category, but if you find that there's a certain music that really calms or relaxes your loved one, use that. And it's okay if it's not what we think of when we think
Yeah.
of relaxing music.
That's great to
But
know.
going back to the benefits, memory recall, we kind of touched on that.
Hmm.
Music has this powerful ability to evoke memories. So playing songs from their past can stimulate that reminiscence and conversation. Engagement, so encouraging participation through singing, clapping, dancing, and that can all improve physical and emotional engagement. Routine activities, so incorporating music into daily routines, such as getting ready for meals or maybe getting ready for bedtime or, to quiet down in the evening. And again, you can kind of change those playlists as you see fit. Using it as a communication aid. So using music as a tool for communication when verbal communication becomes challenging. So sometimes singing or playing music together can facilitate that emotional connection. Sometimes you don't need words. But if you're singing a song together, or if you're drumming together, or if you have, handheld percussion instruments or just body percussion, clapping and tapping, that can be powerful. And then lastly, as a therapeutic intervention, so focusing on music therapy. So having a trained professional like a music therapist, we can address specific cognitive, emotional, or social goals. And that can really help that relationship between caregiver and the care recipient. And so we also tried to talk about, maybe when not to use music. And one thing I
Hmm.
will say is when you're using music in general, it's important to observe their responses to different types of music and adjust accordingly. We really need to be flexible. We need to join their journey, join their environment. And I always stress, don't force the activity or the music, especially because a lot of times you're using it for leisure, you're using it for enjoyment, you're using
Hmm.
it for something positive. And so you don't want to start having a negative association.
That's
You
a
don't
good
want your
point.
loved one to start having this negative association. And there's so many choices that are taken away from our loved one that they're not able to make anymore. So if they say no, try to honor that choice because you don't always need to use music in that moment. And I even honor that as a music therapist. If someone says no to an instrument or if someone says no to a song, I adapt in the moment and try to respect their choices as much as possible. So I always like to share that as well.
Yeah.
Um, And you want to consider preferences and dislikes as well. You know, if you know they don't like Elvis, then you just stay away from Elvis, you know? And when it comes to music and being avoided, you know, we're talking about how powerful it can be. But there are situations where it might not work. So if somebody is agitated, frustrated, or distressed, it might be best to avoid it or choose a different type of music. So if you put on music, you know, sometimes music can connect us back to a memory that might not be positive or a memory that might be frustrating. And that might be the only way our loved one can communicate that is bothering them, you know, if they don't have the verbal skills or the verbal communication to say that. So just be mindful of that. Overstimulation is another one. Folks living with dementia can become overwhelmed or overstimulated, sometimes by loud and fast-paced music or by multiple auditory, you know, stimuli. So if a TV's on, people are talking, and you're trying to listen to music, that may be too many things.
Yeah.
So can you limit that overstimulation? And again, can you maybe take a break from it when that happens? I touched on this just a minute ago, but those negative associations. So you just want to be really aware of that can happen. You know, a lot of times we hear all these beautiful stories about music and connections, and I'm all about celebrating those. But I also, you know, I'm very passionate about giving caregivers the full picture that, you know, there might be a moment. I always use this example. I had a client who loved hymns, who loved Danny Boy. It was one of her like top 3 favorite songs. But there was one moment we used it and it brought her back to her son's funeral. Wow. And so as a music therapist, I was able to process her feelings in the moment and we were able to get through it. But as a caregiver, that might not be something you're comfortable doing. It might not be something that you're equipped to do. And so you kind of just have to gauge it. So if that happens, you know, my first question is, do you want to continue listening? You know, and if they do, then sometimes that might be the way they need to get out that feeling, is to cry. I always say there's no wrong way to feel when you're listening to music. And so you know your loved one best as a caregiver. And so navigating that, I think, can sometimes be tricky, but I think really letting your loved one lead the experience. And then if it continues to happen or they become more tearful or frustrated during specific songs, you know, the first thing would be to avoid those songs and to let anyone on their care team know that, but then also to seek out, you know, professional advice, whether that be from a music therapist, whether that be from your team, whether it's a social worker, your doctor, you know, and just see if there's something else going on. And then I would say the other 2 areas is fatigue. You know, sometimes loud or stimulating music when someone is overtired can kind of push them a little bit. So just be aware of that. And then disinterest, which we've talked about. If somebody shows no interest or response to music, again, I can't stress it enough. You really don't want to force it. Yeah. A lot of times, you know, music will be beneficial for folks, but there are people who maybe music wasn't important in their lives, or they don't have as strong or powerful connections to music. And so just be aware of that. If that's the case, you've done nothing wrong as a caregiver. You know, if it doesn't work, don't be hard on yourself. You know, it could be any number of things or scenarios as to why it's not working in the moment, but just kind of go easy. And again, ultimately, you want to observe your loved one's reactions and adjust accordingly. And then, of course, consult with healthcare professionals or music therapists who can give you more guidance if needed.
Thank you so much for giving us that kind of holistic, well-rounded view of using music and when it can be helpful and in some cases when it might not be. And I know when working with individuals living with dementia or caring for them, sometimes you mention like what works today might not work tomorrow, but could work again 3 days from now. And so I love how you said, don't be hard on yourself if it doesn't work. And maybe you try it another time or in a few days and see if their reaction has changed, or maybe it stays the same and then you avoid that song or that type of music going forward. But sometimes it can be a little bit of that trial and error.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, and I know you've talked a lot about music in the context of dementia. If
Hmm.
someone is caring for a loved one that maybe doesn't have dementia but has various other chronic conditions, what are some other scenarios where music can be helpful? Or I think of also like end of life. Is that maybe another
Yeah.
time when music can be really powerful? Could you speak to that a little bit too?
Yeah. So I'll start with kind of just routines and then I'll go back to end of life because, yeah, end of life is super beneficial with music. But when you're thinking about daily routines, you can use it during ADLs, activities of daily living. So using music for bathing. A lot of times, bath time can be very stressful and can be distressing to an individual. And so, if you set up the whole bath routine to make sure the water's already going, like get the best environment you can. And
Yeah.
then to guide them into the bathroom, you could be singing songs. You could bring, a portable speaker and have their music. Themed playlists are really good too. So this goes even for beyond dementia, but just in general, I know I have a lot of theme playlists, but using it in the car for doctor's appointments. So if that's something that somebody isn't really excited to do, or when you're getting dinner ready or waking up for the day, using music and movement. We kind of touched on that, but for exercise as well. So there are a lot of ways within your daily routine that you can really implement music and do it so it benefits you. And what's so great now with, you've got, I use Spotify, but you've got
Yeah.
Apple Music and Amazon Music, so many, and even YouTube. Everybody has these curated playlists. So if you're not sure where to start, you could start with a wake up playlist and then you could pick out the songs you like to make your own. So it's kind of a good starting point. So if you're like, well, I don't like this song, you can just get rid of that one and maybe replace it with something else. But when you mentioned end of life, music is one of the first things we respond to in the womb, and it's one of the last things we respond to at the end of life. And music can be so beneficial for an individual as they're transitioning. And music, it can be so supportive in so many different ways. And for me as a music therapist, a lot of times I've been fortunate enough to work with clients through that transition. So I've seen them when they're more active, and then I've followed their journey until end of life. And so if you have a music therapist on board through that whole time, what I will say is you get to know that individual. So I worked with somebody in end of life who I'd worked with, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and we'd worked through the pandemic as well. When I was able to go back in and work with them. And so I knew all of their preferred music. I knew their likes and their dislikes. They also knew the sound of my voice. So they knew who I was when I came in and shared music. And, I wasn't sure if they could hear me, if they could connect. And, I got the one hand squeeze as I was holding hands and singing. And there are music therapists who devote their practice to hospice. And it is really such a powerful experience, and something that I will say, you want to focus again on music preferences. I can't stress that enough. If you don't know what music to play for an individual, I really recommend seeking out hospice and ask them if they have a music therapist. Sometimes if they don't have one on staff, they may contract with one because it's really beneficial to get that additional input from a music therapist during that time. And the music therapist also, we provide a lot of bereavement work too. So we work with the family as well. We work with friends, anyone who cares for that individual. So there's music support that can be given both for the individual who's on hospice as well as for the family and friends of that individual.
Wow. That is so neat, and something that I don't think a lot of people consider is how music can be used at end of life. And I loved your suggestion of
Yeah.
asking the hospice company if they have music therapy available,
Hmm.
because hospice has so many great wraparound services that a lot of people don't know about. So that is one of them that I'm glad that you shared today. And I really do want to dive deeper into some practical tools and also how
Yeah.
music can benefit caregivers. But before we do that, we're just going to take a short break to hear from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Home Instead, an honor company. If you find yourself needing extra support as a family caregiver or time away from your caregiving responsibilities, Home Instead can help. Our home care services are delivered by compassionate care professionals and range from personal care, meal preparation, and medication management to Alzheimer's care and hospice support. Visit homeinstead.com to learn more and to find a location near you. Okay, Tara, so you were just telling us how music therapy at end of life can also be helpful for the family and for the caregivers involved. I would love maybe for you to provide some practical tips. You've mentioned already some ways that we can implement music into our daily caregiving roles, but how could a caregiver go about selecting music? Because sometimes that might be overwhelming. Like, there's so much music out there. I kind of know what genres my loved one likes, but how can caregivers practically go out there and find great music for their loved ones?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And it's one that I do a lot of education on because, like you said, it can be so overwhelming. And I cannot stress it enough. Music preferences really are key. That's where you're going to set both yourself and your loved one up for success, sharing music that they enjoyed. You want to listen and share music that they enjoy because that creates a more meaningful and beneficial experience for everyone who's involved. And preferences can be such a powerful tool to provide emotional connection, stimulation, communication, and overall well-being. So there are kind of 5 ways. As a music therapist, I have a whole assessment, right? I'm going a lot deeper to find someone's preferences. But here are kind of 5 ways as a caregiver, as somebody who's caring for someone living with dementia. Here's kind of the how you can explore preferences. The first is asking the individual directly. I know it kind of sounds like it should be common sense, but sometimes we forget that piece, So what kind of music do you enjoy? And you can prompt with examples. So you could say, do you like classical music? Or you could do either or. Do you like rock and roll or country? Do you have any specific bands or artists you enjoy? What are your favorite songs? So I always say, start with yes or no questions. If that's going well, then you can kind of work to open-ended questions. But not everyone is able to communicate that or articulate that. So if that doesn't work, another good place is asking family and friends. So even if you are a family caregiver, can you ask your siblings or can you ask aunts and uncles or, any relatives that spend a lot of time with that individual or friends? Do they have a friend who they've known, maybe they've lived across the street for years and maybe you're still in contact with them. I talked with a caregiver who said, I found out my loved one's music preferences from their neighbor because they used to go to concerts together. Oh, wow. So utilizing people who are close to that individual and kind of reaching out and asking, did you have any musical memories or was there anything did you go dancing? Anything like that can be helpful. Exploring their music collection. So if somebody has records, CDs, cassettes, 8-track tapes, literally anything, right? Digital playlists now, did they create their own digital playlist? Do they have their own music account somewhere? So going through that can be really beneficial. I've used album covers before. Sometimes too, if you're sorting through records, if someone has a record collection or a CD collection, that can be fun just to sort through it with your loved one because I've seen individuals who they see the album cover of John Denver and they light up because they recognize his face. So sometimes that can be an activity in itself, so you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it alone. You can do it with your loved one if you'd like. And the next thing I would recommend is music that was popular from when they were younger. So there's research that says late teens to early 20s, so anywhere from 18 to 25, is music that kind of stays with us the longest. And then I also recommend in that topic music from early childhood if music was present in someone's life, so that can be important, or music that family and friends listen to. So another example I like to share is I had a client who, going by his age, he was too young for the song Sentimental Journey, but his mother sang it to him. So it was a song that we used in every session. We ended every session with Sentimental Journey. And for him, there was a lot of meaning behind it because it reminded him of his mother and it was one that he really liked to hear. So I always share that as well. It's a good starting point if you don't know where to start with music, but don't limit yourself, if that makes sense. You can use it as a starting point, but don't necessarily put yourself in a box. And then lastly is just guess and check. So be a detective. And, as a caregiver, you're being a detective in a lot of ways when you're caring for someone living with dementia. So sharing music from different decades, different genres. What's great about Google and YouTube is it makes it a little bit easier. So if they love country music, you could just Google top country hits from 1960. Or if they love Willie Nelson, I'm coming from Austin, so I've still got Texas on the brain here. But with Willie Nelson, you could search for artists similar to Willie Nelson. So if they like a specific artist or a specific band or, a genre, they love rock, like traditional 1950s rock and roll, then you can kind of branch out. And those are some of the ways you could do that. And I also say, too, experiment with new music. Sometimes songs on the radio, people who are present now. I have a client who loved Simon and Garfunkel, but also loved Pink. So I've used Pink in my sessions, so I share that to not be afraid to explore. I mean, your loved one, for the most part, they're going to let you know if they enjoy it or they don't, whether that's verbally or, nonverbal cues. And so that's a way that you can explore. And the other thing I would say is just make sure you're documenting somewhere, whether it's in your phone, whether you're creating your own playlist, but you want to make a list of songs that have positive and negative responses or any music that was mentioned by your loved one, because you can refer back to that list. You're doing a million things as a caregiver. And so a lot of times then that could be just a refresher when you're sharing music again. But also if you have somebody else who comes, family and friends who come to visit, or maybe somebody else comes in to provide care, if you give them that list, that can be extremely helpful. And I will say a music therapist would be very thankful for that list. I enjoy discovering someone's music preferences, but if I have a list to go off of, it gives me a starting point as well.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up at the end about how that information could be helpful to others involved in the care ecosystem. I know our professional caregivers at Home Instead, they utilize music a lot. And at a lot of times we love when we're doing kind of an intake or get to know you session with the client to learn about those things. So the more you can share it with those involved in the person's life, you're really setting everyone up for success in the care system. And I know in our earlier conversation, Tara, you had mentioned how music also can be a powerful tool in creating positive connections for families in caregiving situations. Sometimes caregiving can be so stressful. Or if your loved one has dementia and cognitive decline, you're kind of watching your loved one slip away. But music can be a powerful way to make a connection. Or if you feel like, okay, I'm going to go visit my mom in the care community, but I don't really know what we're going to do. Because I think a lot of times we feel like we need to do something or have a meaningful conversation. But if communication is limited, how do we make that meaningful connection? So can you talk a little bit about how music can create those positive connections between family or friends of the person maybe living with dementia or another chronic condition?
Yeah. So there's some big, kind of broad areas that I'll highlight where it can be really helpful. The first one that I think is huge for caregivers is respite and self-care. So this is more focused if you're having a music therapy session. So caregivers can find a moment of respite. So you can focus on yourself while your loved one's participating in a session. So I have worked with a lot of folks in the home where the caregiver is then able to do whatever they need to take care of, make phone calls, take care of laundry, maybe just sit in quiet, maybe that's their time to rest. That's their time to read, to do, their own leisure activity. It offers them a chance to recharge and engage in those self-care practices. And then ultimately that's giving them more energy to then care for their loved one. Enhancing communication and connection. So this is kind of what you were touching on. Music creates, and music therapy specifically creates, a safe and supportive space for people living with dementia to express emotions and thoughts that they may struggle to communicate with their caregivers. So if you're working with a music therapist, sometimes if they're getting their frustrations out with the music therapist, that can improve communication and can foster deeper understanding and strengthen that bond between caregivers and their loved ones. And that's the same even if they're just sharing music. When we think of a shared experience and relationship support, right? When you engage in music activities, it is this shared experience. And so it can foster moments of joy and connection amidst the challenges of caregiving, which is, I think, almost identically what you said, but it's a good reminder. I think we can't say it enough. It offers opportunities for meaningful interactions, and it can help navigate the changes in their relationship as care needs evolve. And so one thing that I like to always share as an example is in a care community setting. So if you have care staff, I always invite them into my music groups, my music therapy groups. If they have the time, I know they've got their checklists that they're going through. Because again, if you're the nurse, you're always going around and you're giving medications. So that's not something everybody is super pumped to get, right? So can, that nurse be engaged in a music activity with Mr. Smith? And then maybe she remembers, oh, Mr. Smith loves Hank Williams. So maybe I'll play Hank Williams when I go into his room. And maybe we'll sing a song or we'll listen to a song, and then I'll provide the medication. And the same goes for a family caregiver or caring in the home. There are so many tasks and day-to-day things that you're doing with your loved one that's frustrating for both people. You may not have wanted to find yourself in this situation, and you're doing your best, but it's really challenging. So can you break up the day with some meaningful moments that can connect both of you in a positive way that you can then help for the rest of the day with care, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that you're so right. Kind of integrating music in your daily routine can be so beneficial. It doesn't necessarily have to be this like activity of, okay, we're going to sit down and listen to music. It can be something that
Yeah.
can be integrated into the care that you provide. Maybe it's a song or two here in the morning and then in the afternoon. Or you could also, of course, make it kind of an activity in and of itself and involve, I know you mentioned earlier, like instruments and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Can be kind of a great addition to just listening to music. So any other tips on, beyond just listening to it, what you can do to get more involved in the music itself?
Yeah. So I think when you're thinking of music, I think one of the things is just being in the moment with it. So when you have music on, if your loved one's swaying, if they're tapping their toes, you want to mirror those movements, you want to encourage that. So I think movement is really big, and movement to music is great. I think meaningful discussion afterwards. So, again, this is where a computer or Google, if you don't know the history of a song, but if you're listening to Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, and after you're listening to it, you might ask your loved one, did they ever take a trip or a vacation by the water? Do they like being by the water? And if someone, so for me, for example, I grew up by the ocean in New Jersey. It's part of why I'm now in Wilmington, why we moved here. And so for me, that's something that pretty much anyone who knows me knows that about me. So that would be really beneficial if you were to share songs about the water or the ocean or traveling or, anything like that. That's going to get a pretty strong emotional response out of me. So that's a way that you can look at music too, is focusing on a broad topic. And you can just put that in a Google search, songs about the beach, songs about springtime. So, you can do any category, any theme. And then you look at that list, and how you pare it down is by the preferences. So if your loved one loves 1950s music, you look at that list and typically it'll say the year of the song. So that's a way that you can pare it down. And I think visuals are great. So pictures. So if you're listening to Hello, Dolly, maybe bring up a picture of Barbara Streisand because she was in the movie. So I feel like more people saw the movie. So, can you bring, and I think in the movie, she has a gold dress, and I think on Broadway it's a red dress, so you could compare the pictures, who wore it better, right? You could do something like that, or you could do, a picture from when the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yes.
And so that's a really core memory for a lot of folks. If they watch the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, that can spark discussion. You can also, if you are, and stop me because I feel like I could just keep going with examples.
I love them.
But if you're thinking of the song My Favorite Things, so that's another good one. It lists a lot of favorite things. You could then make your own list. And so if your loved one, again, a lot of these might be communication heavy. So if your loved one does not have those skills to access anymore, you could look around the room and point out, photos or blankets. Do they have a favorite blanket? Do they, and you could just identify, oh, I've noticed you love this blanket, or I've noticed you love going and sitting outside, and so those can be favorite things. Listening to music outdoors. Mm-hmm. Again, you want to make sure it's not overstimulating. So depending on where you live, as long as there's not a lot of outside stimuli, but if you can be on the front porch or in the backyard, that's kind of nice too, because then you can watch the birds or wildlife, or do you have wind chimes? So that's a way that you can incorporate, an instrument, quote unquote, to where you're just going out and you're listening to the wind chimes. So there are so many different ways that you can utilize music, both as a structured activity and also just an in the moment activity. And music can also be a great motivator. So I always like to share that with caregivers too. We're talking about exercise and movement. And, I recently saw something on Instagram about a family caregiver having a hard time getting a loved one out for a walk. So could you incorporate music? And that could be with headphones, that could be with a portable speaker, it could be with just your phone, if that's accessible, and maybe you're just walking in the backyard. So maybe it's not walking in the street where there's a lot of noise and a lot of distractions, on a sidewalk. Maybe you're just doing a loop in the backyard or going to a park, so there's a lot of different opportunities there as well, where you can use music as a motivator when your loved one is a little resistant to do activities that you may need them to do, right? Music is one of those activities that's a choice, but there are a lot of other activities that are a necessity in caregiving. So can music help assist to make that a little easier?
I love those examples. You can never have too many examples in my book.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And this is also just kind of getting me thinking about how music could be a powerful intergenerational activity as well. Because you've been mentioning, pulling songs from childhood. And a lot of times in families, songs are passed down from generation to generation in terms of like lullabies or spiritual music, or even, having conversations with grandkids. Here's a song that I liked when I was younger. What's one of your favorite songs today? And maybe they share an Ariana Grande song or something, and they can explain, just have a conversation or dialogue about how music has changed from when they were young to today and those kinds of things. So I think that what I'm learning from this conversation is music can be used in so many ways, a vast variety of ways, whether you're working with a music therapist or whether you're a family caregiver, it can really just be such a powerful tool. And before we wrap up our conversation today, Tara, I know we could probably talk about this for hours on end, but I know we both have places to be today, but I would love to hear more about how could a family caregiver go about finding a music therapist? And then also, how can people follow your work? I know you've also written a book on this topic too. So would love for you to kind of wrap up our conversation today talking about those things.
Yeah, no problem. So I would say one of the easiest ways to find a board certified music therapist in your area is to go to cbmt.org, and that is the Certification Board of Music Therapists. And so you could look me up right now. You could look me up by my name. If you had my certification number, you could look me up that way. You could look me up by my location, and it might still say Austin now. I think I have to change that. But if you looked up by name, that's a way to do it. But if you don't know a therapist in your area, you can look up by location and see who's in your area. And just reach out to them that way. A lot of times their contact information is listed. I will also say I always welcome folks, if you are not in my area and virtual services, I provide virtual and in-person services, but virtual services are not always appropriate for folks living with dementia, depending where they're at on their journey or, who they are as an individual. But I'm happy to connect you with somebody in your area. So I have had people reach out who's like, hey, do you know anybody in the New England area? And so, there needs to be more of us, I will say that. But I'm happy to connect you if I can. And if I'm able, I'm happy to provide you with those resources. So you can also reach out to me as well as going to CBMT. And I can do my best to connect you. But to connect with me, my website and my company name is Harmony in Dementia. So just www.harmonyindementia.com. And I am at Harmony in Dementia on social media and LinkedIn as well. So you can find me there. And then, as you mentioned, I co-authored a book called Music, Memory, and Meaning. You can find that on Amazon. But it goes into what we talked about today. It kind of does a little bit of a deeper dive of why music is so powerful, why it's beneficial, how to set yourself up for success, how to discover music preferences. The second part of the book is playlists. So it's different genres, Broadway, country, 1970s music. And it's about 15 or 20 songs in each playlist that the three of us, all music therapists, found were significant in our work. And we also sent out a survey to music therapists. And then the third part takes songs from those playlists and it's taking the music further. So again, a lot of what we touched on today. So it's taking a song like Elvis's Love Me Tender. Mm-hmm. It'll give you some facts about the song. It'll give you some recommendations on what you can do while you're listening. And then it'll give you some ideas on meaningful discussion questions. So some things to ask afterwards. So it's a really great starting point if it feels overwhelming to just kind of jump in and do all of this, with the book and a device to play music. That's really all you need. And then when you become more comfortable engaging in that way, then you can add your own questions and your own engagement activities and things like that.
What a fantastic resource. I love that there's those curated playlists in the back. I know that could probably be so helpful for caregivers that are looking for an easy place to start. So, Tara, gosh, I've learned so much from our conversation today. Thank you so much for joining me and for sharing all of this wonderful information. I will make sure we link to the websites that you shared, especially your website, Harmony in Dementia, in our show notes so that folks can continue to follow your great work. And just thank you for all that you do to bring meaning and music to people's lives. We are just so grateful for you and your work.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
As we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank Tara for joining me and for sharing her expertise. Music can truly be an instrument of comfort, connection, and joy in the journey of caregiving. I hope you've learned a few new tips on how to use music as a tool in your day-to-day caregiving role. I would love to hear how you're using music. You can email me at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc. That's homeinsteadinc.com. I also invite you to follow us on Facebook at Home Instead Inc. That's Home Instead INC for previews of upcoming episodes, caregiving tips, and more. You can find all of the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and please remember to take good care of yourself while you care for others. Caregiver Chats is brought to you by Home Instead. If you're looking for in-home care to support you on your caregiving journey, please visit homeinstead.com/caregiverchats to learn more.